Dr. Sarah Williams is a licensed mental health therapist and clinical supervisor. As a frequent TV and media expert, she specializes in grief, stress, and trauma care. As she shares her personal story of workplace abuse, Dr. Sarah unlocks the power of saying the quiet part out loud.
Thank you. When you tagged and liked my post, I was like, Dr. Sarah. So anytime I see a doctor in front of a name, I'm like, okay, is she someone who can lend some really great expert advice for people who are going through any kind of trauma? And I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for suggesting, liking, commenting, and being open to having this conversation that is so needed right now. Do you think that a lot of people are reticent, especially Black folks, reticent to go to see a therapist because culturally speaking, so many of us have been told, just pray, your faith will get you through, just pray. And now all of a sudden, it really feels as if there's this movement of mental health and mental awareness, how we are beginning to finally receive the services that we need to make sure that our mental health is intact. What do you think, and why do you think that is?
Ironically, it is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just having that conversation. I just did a news interview on why culturally there are some barriers. And there are a number of explanations for that. One is there's a reluctance because the stigma still exists. There are so many of us that feel if we seek out a therapist that we are somehow being disloyal to our faith. That I can even recall my own experiences and approaching someone in the church about feeling depressed, having grief, because I've had significant grief. I'm a survivor of trauma in my life, and just wanting to have someone to kind of talk to about it. And their first response was, "You are too blessed to be stressed."
How many times have we all heard that
Right.
one to the point where we say it and it just kind of rolls off of our tongues, but we probably don't realize that we're doing a disservice to ourselves by just repeating a mantra without there being really any substance behind it.
Right. And statistically, our white Americans tend to have more diagnoses, more mental health diagnoses than Black people do. Okay.
Interesting.
However, the persistence and the long-term chronic impairment as a result of the mental health diagnoses is higher among people of color. Right, because there is such a long time of exposure to the mental health diagnosis without any intervention. So it becomes disabling when it is actually addressed. In addition to that, there are more non-Black or white Caucasian populations that are in outpatient care. And people of color represent a higher number of individuals in crisis intensive care.
My goodness. What do we need to do about this? Those statistics they're startling. They're heartbreaking.
Yeah.
They're heartbreaking. What can we do as a society to change that around? And for those of us who are, BIPOCs to get the help that we desperately need.
The intervention is complex because it is important that people of color have access to people of color because it kind of limits the amount of the biases and judgments and things that happen in the mental health setting that normally or may not happen if you are interfacing with a person of your same demographic. However, the challenge now is that there are a limited number of clinicians of color. I mean, in the medical community, there still is a lack of physicians and frontline folks, psychiatrists, clinicians like myself, that are representative of the minority population. So then, as a result, to seek care, It has to be a very intricate journey to find a clinician that expresses cultural competence and can address your needs, because there is a persistent problem in populations of color of
Mhm.
misdiagnoses or underdiagnoses,
Mhm.
which goes back to the original point as to why an individual may be in crisis mode when they finally get attention.
It's interesting that you said that in the spirit of full transparency, I will share, and I have with family and friends, but maybe not on this platform, that it took me 3 therapists before I finally found someone who was a woman of color, a person of color, who understood what I was going through as it related to the workplace bullying and abuse. And Dr. Sarah, when I tell you that I was literally on my knees one night about to cry thinking about it, and I told my husband, I said, something's not right. I am a smart woman and I don't know what to do because the behaviors, it was persistent, it was intentional, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't solve it, but I knew that my mind, just by ruminating over it every day incessantly, I couldn't sleep. I could barely eat. My hair was falling out. The physical manifestations of my mind being bullied had me going down a very slippery slope. And so the idea of suicide ideation, I never really understood what that meant until I was in that spot. And yet people think, well, why would you want to go? I mean, all therapists are supposed to be there to help you. It's not about someone going to someone who's black or going to someone who's white. I mean, can't they just help you? And there's a real divide, if you will, that, as you mentioned, we need people who look like us because they totally, truly understand not just workplace abuse, but the racial component that is added on top of that. How do we, as you're a clinician, how do we speak this, not just the narrative, but the truth of our experiences are different, that it's almost kind of a double jeopardy, if you will. You have discrimination on top of being a person of color. So it's the combination of the two.
And really, you are speaking the manifesto of why I became a therapist.
Really?
Okay. So my story is that I already had a PhD and I was teaching at a university.
Hmm.
And I had not ever really truly addressed my trauma. Higher performing professionals are composed of individuals that are likely going to experience extreme maladies related to mental health disorders and are going to seek the more extreme resolution, which is potentially ending their life. Because the signs and the symptoms can be so subtle, and we push through and we continue to work and we show up looking like Andrea, beautiful hair done. There is no way to look at you and be able to appropriately diagnose internally the war within. Um, my clients look like you. And to go back to my original reason for becoming a therapist has so much to do with the fact that I was a victim of workplace bullying, systemic bullying.
Mm.
I was doing and working my life job. I dreamed always of being a college professor. That is all I wanted to ever do. I was in third grade and they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to teach
Oh
college."
my gosh. I was in 4th grade when they said, Mrs. Cotton, who lived right next door to me, she says, what do you want to be? And I'm like, I want to be the lady in the TV. Like
Yes,
4th grade. I remember it. And has always been my dream career. And so for me, I'm sure like you, I was devastated because I had to literally walk away. If I were still there, I would be dead. I know that.
right.
I mean, I know that my breast cancer is a result of
It was a
really
symptom.
the symptom of the manifestation of what was going on and the mental depravity that they had to be going through. I know that for sure. And when you tell people that, like you said earlier, people look at us and they're like, you got it going on. You're
No,
fine. Even
right.
when I told everyone what was happening, people doubted me. They were like, that's not true. You're happy on TV. You're smiling. And I'm like, well, that's my job. That's my job. I was supposed to. Not that I was faking it, but there was just a lot of pain that was hidden, that I had been silent about for so long.
Yes. I typically say the quiet part out loud,
Mm,
that the individuals in our community are the people that look like us that are suffering the most. So I became a therapist because during my tenure of teaching, and I was teaching and I had small children, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. There was significant dysfunctional patterns within my family of origin that had never been addressed. I am the family scapegoat, so it made it even more painful losing my mother. I enjoyed that process, and unfortunately, my mother did succumb to cancer. I then relocated back to my home state, and within a year of that, my husband was diagnosed with cancer. He also passed away.
mm.
And
Condolences.
I was devastated. And here I am, a mom, and I'm attempting to regain my composure and regain my professional life. And I was not performing. I know I was not performing. I had always had a diagnosis of lupus that happened, many years ago, but the lupus was just unrelenting, and I was no longer in remission, and I was just experiencing every symptom of my chronic illness. So the grieving part of it is what I could identify with as a high performing professional. So I sought grief counseling mainly for my children, because me, I'm okay. Remember, I'm
We
all put
push
together.
through.
We push through, we
Mhm.
pray. I got this. And I would go to the therapist and they would help my children. So I finally ran across a therapist that asked me, well, what about you? Who are you seeing? And it never occurred to me that I needed to see someone. So
Were you offended when they asked you that? Were you offended? Like,
I was
I'm
teaching,
fine.
and I was like, am I expressing something to you that makes you look like I can't handle this? Initially, I
Yeah.
was very defensive. Um, and it took me 3 different therapists. And one of the therapists, this was that, I guess you call it the aha moment.
Hmm.
One of
Oh,
the
yes.
therapists said to me, you already have a doctorate. You've been teaching for 15 years. You've got all this knowledge. Didn't your education and your school teach you how to deal with this?
Whoa. Whoa.
My aha.
Light bulb moment.
And I said, once I crawl through this, I will definitely find a way to help other women that look like me, period.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I did it. I
Mm.
Everybody I approached, I said, I'm going back to college. I've got to they're like, you're crazy. You already have a doctorate.
Mhm.
And that's it. And I'm like, no,
Mhm.
it's not it. I've got to somehow reach back and help others that are experiencing this same type of treatment. So actually, I never really addressed my own trauma from my workplace experience. I
So explain briefly what happened to you. What was your workplace experience like as it related to the abuse and the bullying? What happened?
um, essentially, I believe a message was sent to me that contained pornographic material
Mm.
by accident. I wasn't supposed to be included on this email.
Yeah.
And it was through some folks that were at the job where I was working.
Hmm.
So, and loyalty to this person who was in a position of authority, I thought I was being a good colleague and say, hey, your name is included in this email. And if the wrong person sees it, it could cost you your retirement, your job, etc.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I showed it to this person and I said, you might want to delete that like right away and get rid of it. And I didn't think any more about it. I didn't realize that that person then saw me as a potential threat to them because I have knowledge now.
Mm.
I am not designed to be a person that retaliates. That's not in
Right.
my nature.
It's not it. Same here. Yeah.
Yeah. So what ended up happening was I had this person had to configure a dynamic that would push me out.
Mm.
And
Trying to protect himself
right,
or herself.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
And they were successful doing that.
Oh my goodness. So
They
like what happened? What did they do?
all the I I was ignored, I was isolated, I was not given training, I was given schedules that were near impossible for a single parent. Um, I was students were actually part of the smear campaign. There's a smear campaign that even goes on to this day um, against me that individuals really don't know where it all started.
Yeah.
They think maybe
Yeah.
it started from my dissertation, because I wrote in my dissertation that there was only one or two people that continued to be my friend in that time. I didn't name any names. I didn't do anything like that. So there's some people that will open that one page and see that and think that's where all the hate came from. But actually the hate started from this person's paranoia that I would go to HR or I would go to the authorities about this horrible email that I received. Never mind the fact that you just should not be sharing information of that nature,
Right.
and that you now are enjoying a retirement because of my willingness to be loyal, but instead you take every variable and turn it against me. I then, during that episode, my lupus was just raging, and I ended up having to be on medical leave right away. And this new job had just started, and I loved it so much. I had to be on medical leave. While I was on medical leave, I received a letter saying that I was terminated. So here I am, home with twins, on medical leave, taking methotrexate, which is similar to chemo. And I received a knock at the door, and rather it being a thank you card or flowers or get well or something, it was a letter from that particular employer telling me that we're not renewing your contract.
Oh my goodness.
They reversed that decision and allowed me to come back, but they allowed me to come back with the purpose of treating me like garbage so that I would go ahead and leave.
So you would be forced, you would walk away. Yeah. They made it bad.
Exactly. That's all what's going on. But it's kind of like I've talked a lot about how God will create the worst experience and turn it around for your good.
Isn't that something? I say the same thing. I never knew during going through it. I kept saying, God, what am I supposed to learn from this? What is the purpose? And you're absolutely right. He does turn it around for our good. And that's what the word says for those of us who are believers. Everything works together for good. Everything works together for good. And when you're in it and sitting in it, you're like, what possibly good can come out of this?
That's what I was thinking, that I cannot recover from this. And I will end up on a park bench because my doctorate was in education. I was not trained to do anything but teach bodies in higher education. That's what I was trained to do. So now I'm having to pivot in the midst of this horrible storm. And as I mentioned, my mom got really sick. So I had to relocate. And in that time, I sat next to a person at a church Bible study, and I mentioned to her about my intention of getting my license in mental health therapy and what my plan was. And I said, I don't know where I'm going to go because now I'm in Florida and the school I was planning to go to is in Virginia. And I was worried about not having any work because, of course, what they did. And she told me about how I could go and get my license online. I already had all the classes almost. I could just do the postmaster's program online and then do my residency. And I was amazed, and she gave me all this information. I went home, did the research, I got admitted, I talked to people about my situation, I got scholarships, I got help. People came from, I can't tell you how many angels were placed in my life when I had to go to the campus. I had small children, and people would randomly offer to babysit my twins so that I wouldn't miss class. I realized they were taking turns on their break and taking my children out to keep them satisfied and pacified and buy them snacks. And I went back to church. I never saw this lady again, ever.
Are you serious?
I don't know her name. I can't tell you. I get chills talking about it.
Oh, I
Not
literally the hair just stood up on my back and arms.
and she changed my life
She was an
because
angel.
she was an angel, had to be. And when I asked people, they were like, "We have no idea who you're talking about," and I don't know who that is. She must have just been visiting. So her assignment was to sit next to me, plant that in me. And so here it was. Yes, my mother was very sick and everything in my world was falling apart. And at night I would log in online and I started taking these clinical mental health therapy classes.
Yeah.
And I started healing myself. Like I literally started learning about myself, and not in a hateful, vindictive way, but in a way that, hey, the people that hurt you, maybe they are struggling with trauma themselves.
Yeah.
Individuals that co-signed on this behavior. Every bully has flying monkeys, and they can't exist without those in the workplace. They have to co-sign these individuals who are also afraid that if they don't co-sign, there are individuals that witnessed the mistreatment and they were afraid to speak up, because if they speak up, they will then become the target. They don't want the target to become the target.
Yeah.
They knew it was wrong. And the way God will work things out, there are several individuals that were a part of this espionage that have had to sit down and get help from me. And I was able to work with them, help them in a neutral stance, often godly support and compassion, in a way that I know that God has delivered me from everything. So to this day, I'm sure there's this fear that I will somehow write a book or come forward or say something that will blow the roof off of it. And I never did, because I never needed that. I needed this. I needed to run across an Andrea who survived something, the same thing I did, who called me to speak on their platform, to bring this message, to say I survived it. I became a therapist, and now there are hundreds of other women that I have helped, supported, and saved their lives because of what happened to me. If I can survive it and I can deliver a message, and every single thing, every year of my life, something happened that was designed to destroy me. I'm talking everything. I did not hear you're beautiful, you're lovely. I did not know that my body was boundaryless. I didn't know that men could just take advantage of me, and I'm not allowed to say anything. I didn't know a life of going to the hospital to get treatment and not be sexually molested by my provider. I did not know that I could work somewhere and I would be isolated and not have a team and survive that, because there was no one to deliver this kind of direct message. So everything that happened to me, it happened to me so that I could sit here on this Tuesday afternoon and deliver a message to say, yes. And think about it. If we allow individuals to continue to create, destroy, and impede, we would not have a Kamala Harris right now as a potential presidential candidate that might be president of the United States, a woman, a Black woman, a woman of color. We wouldn't have that. So I didn't create this platform for myself to make friends. That's okay. I've survived my entire life being a loner. I said alone at lunch. I was a loner within my family. I was not wanted. They made sure I understood that I was the extra and that I was an additional responsibility that we can do without. You're in the way. And I survived that. And even to this day, I'm going into my 50s and the espionage has never stopped. But what also happened is that I became the kind of mother that I wake up every single day and I have a 19-year-old daughter that I can pour into, that I know that she's going to go out into the healthcare field, because she's going to nursing and pre-med, and she's going to go out into the healthcare field And she wakes up every day knowing she's beautiful, knowing she's
Yeah.
appreciated, knowing that she's wanted, knowing that she has a mother that will lay down in front of a bus for her. That's what
Doctor, I am so sorry, but I keep crying because you literally are saying everything that I experienced and the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I know that there's so many more women out there, especially Black women, who are suffering in silence. And for me, it was my son, it was my family, but I kept looking at my son. And there are days when I look at pictures of him when I was going through the abuse, and I have to ask my husband, when was this? I don't remember this. Because I was so just caught up in trying to navigate everything that was going on at the office. And so as you're speaking, it just hits home. And I had nobody. I was in isolation. I had no one to talk to. I mean, my family knew, but even my witnesses turned their backs on me. And that is a pain that I am still having to work through. And I don't know, I know I'm supposed to forgive, and I've forgiven, but how do you help people push through? Because you, for you to be able to help those people who harmed you, that's, ooh, that's,
Mhm.
that's remarkable. It's remarkable. And I'm just going to be honest, I'm not there yet. There's still so much pain because you think you've been loyal to them,
Mhm.
and when they're not loyal to you for something as simple as just open your mouth and tell the truth about what happened, I will never forget that pain. And I have prayed about it, and it's just hard. It's still very, very difficult for me. How do you help people get through that pain?
Well, first, I will say that for your situation in particular, what I sense is that you are expecting you to show up in other people.
That's true. My sister mentioned that to me, that I'm expecting me from other people.
Right. That loyalty, that
Oh,
you would speak up, you would be an advocate, that may not always be in someone else. They may not always have that self awareness or that confidence. And also
yeah,
know this, that the individuals that were a part of that co sign that treatment, they have to wake up with themselves every day.
that's true. Yeah.
You have to wake up with healing from it. They have to wake up knowing they are it. Like, I am that horrible person that someone else needs recovery from.
Yeah. Wow.
And
Wow.
just to speak to women that are having a hard time forgiving and letting go because you're not supposed to.
Mm. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that the forgiveness doesn't have anything to do with the other party.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
It starts in here. It's forgiving yourself for allowing someone to mistreat you.
Mm. That's
If
the number one thing that I hear from a lot of people on social media. It's that, we continue to ask that question, why? And we'll never, obviously, you'll never get the answer to it. And even if you did, does it really make a difference? Will it
no,
make a difference?
if you were to look at life from the lens of the person that harmed you and look into them and see them, say they were 8 years old or 9 years old.
Hmm.
We had them in our classes. We had them at our church and in our community. They normally were bullies, and it
Mm-hmm.
went unchecked.
Yeah.
And for some reason, their needs were not met when they were 3 or 4 or 5. And that type of behavior worked for them. It provided
Mm-hmm.
whatever that need was.
Mm-hmm.
So someone like you comes along who's kind and loving and forgiving and
Generous and
joy
mhm.
and generous, exactly. You are going to be a target.
Mm.
So how do we cope with psychological abuse in the workplace It starts with having that internal psychological resilience that stops it at day one. Because if once you really think about the pattern, it didn't just like start bad, like all one day, all of a sudden. There were
True.
little microaggressions, there were little bitty things along the way that you kind of dismissed, or you didn't want to say anything because you didn't want to disrupt the pattern. And I'm speaking to all the women that could be listening right now. There were things like, oh, can you work my shift for me, or they make little little comments, and little half jokes that, oh, I was just joking. And that if you are strong enough to stop it right then, it will likely, unfortunately, that the bully moves on to some other target. They have to have a target, and it has to be ongoing. If you leave, then the attention is focused on someone else. Sometimes it's within the own little unit. Sometimes after the victim leaves, then the individuals turn on themselves. And that happens in family systems, that happens in business and work, it happens in marriage couples, it happens in any dynamic where there's an individual that has to have a power and control over another individual in order to feel complete.
Get ready for part 2 as our very raw and personal conversation continues with Dr. Sarah, unlocking tangible steps as part of your healing journey from trauma. Thank you so much for listening, and please share this episode and channel with others. I'll see you next week.